Okay, welcome to the second round of Quick Talks. The format this time will be the same as last time. We're going to have 10 presenters, 6 minutes each, and then a Q&A afterwards. Our first presenter is actually a movie that we're going to show. It's Nancy Bockino, who's a research associate with the Northern Rockies Conservation Cooperative, and her title is For the Love of the Whitebark.
Whitebark pine is the foundation of the alpine. Across the West, it regulates snowmelt, manages water cycles, and sustains an entire world of biodiversity. But today, this tree is facing a perfect storm. A combination of non-native blister rust, the native mountain pine beetle, and shifting climate patterns has triggered unprecedented mortality. It's a crisis so severe that in 2023, the whitebark pine was officially listed as a federally threatened species, marking a loss of over half its mature overstory. Presently, the whitebark pine in the Tetons face the imminent loss of their remaining mature trees to an erupting beetle epidemic within the next few years, leaving only younger size classes. Our federal partners are working to help, but they're up against unstable funding and thin resources. And critical climate initiatives are being defunded under the current administration. For the Love of Whitebark acts as a collaborative bridge uniting a network of partners, including NGOs, academics, federal agencies, ski resorts, and our own donor collective, to ensure the species' long-term survival. We believe that true resilience isn't found in a single agency, but in the connections between us. Like in a whitebark forest, strength comes from the collective. For the Love of Whitebark isn't just a project, it's a network, an ecosystem of stewards across the West. For the Love of Whitebark provides stability for long-term stewardship of whitebark pine with commitment, flexibility, efficient use of time, and exceptional human-powered capacity to access remote areas. With decades of field experience and academic rigor, we support conservation. This year, we are identifying 200 new, potentially rust-resistant trees across the West, and we are planting 6,500 seedlings across the greater Yellowstone. We are protecting 5,000 mature seed-source trees from mountain pine beetle attack. And we are removing 150 beetle-infested brood trees to decrease the beetle's spread. Our work is science-led, with research and publications each year, including technical papers sharing remote brood tree sanitation and tree protection projects, research on fire impacts to regeneration, and the distribution of an annotated bibliography of hundreds of papers on whitebark pine. We share our love for the whitebark through in-house produced professional media on our website to inspire the stewardship needed to save this ancient species. We are able to respond with adaptability, speed, and logistical expertise to provide support when and where the trees need us most. We are the repository for 25 plus years of institutional knowledge and a strong mentorship program within our team. While federal staff rotate out, our network provides the multi-decade legacy stewardship these slow-growing trees require. Our diverse funding ensures the mission is resilient and survives even if one partner loses a fund source. Navigating the friction between government frameworks and urgent field realities requires a collaborative spirit. We remain vulnerable to polarization that can alienate partners, no matter how strong the science and the mission. Because success belongs to the whitebark and the ecosystems they sustain, success is a landscape-level achievement that transcends individual attribution. Moving beyond institutional constraints requires leadership focused on localized impact, field-level empowerment, and shared responsibility. Our work isn't just about a tree. It's a template for how we save nature in a changing democracy. For the Love of Whitebark is a proof of concept. This networked model can be applied to any natural resource challenge across the West. We are the catalysts for ecosystem-led conservation. We charge the public and land managers to embrace the lessons learned from the whitebark and to operate as an interconnected ecosystem of professionals and citizens supporting one another. Join us to strive for a future where whitebark pine forests grace the alpine and thrive as the foundation of mountain ecosystems across the West.
Okay, next I'd like to welcome Jenny Fitzgerald, the Executive Director of the Jackson Hole Conservation Alliance. She'll be presenting on Rooted in Community, Building Civic Power for Conservation in an Eroding Democracy.
Great. Thank you all for being here today. I think after what we've heard today, we could all agree that the last few years have been difficult to navigate, to say the least. What happens when the conservation policies we built everything on start to crack? When federal conservation policies that took decades to build and have served as the bedrock for landscape-scale conservation are no longer solid and a reliable foundation. The Alliance is a local conservation advocacy nonprofit many of you are familiar with, and we started as a grassroots organization 47 years ago in the basement of the Antler Inn, when Jackson looked a little bit more like this than it does today. We focus on countywide land use policy across both public and private lands. We focus on Teton County, Wyoming, and realize that what we do here can set important precedents across the ecosystem and conservation policy nationally. Some of the conservation tactics that have been used over the past half century still apply, while others are outdated and require a shift in thinking, strategy, and action. When the foundation starts to give, logic says, stop everything and fix it. But if we're not the engineers, we're the ones building the structure above it. If we stop, everything else collapses too. We will not step away from our local focus, because this is where we have the greatest power through local civic networks and the greatest ability to affect change. And while the national level of politics impacts all of us, we cannot fight every battle. It's important to know your strengths. Commit to what you can influence and where you do have the power, and remain strategic in how to continue to build and wield that power. As a piece of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, we believe that residency implies stewardship. If you're here, you are responsible. Though not everyone embodies that yet, it is a goal. The GYE is made up of a patchwork of governance from tribal, federal, state, town, county, from robust land use, as we've heard, all the way to practically absent. To echo some of Todd Wilkinson's messaging, sprawl is arguably the largest threat to the GYE currently, a product of poor leadership, divided communities, which leads to a lack of policy and decision-making. Every subdivision, every zoning change, every permit, these are conservation decisions that are made daily, and they're happening at an accelerating pace. They are permanent, and they shape not just our physical landscape, but also the social and political ones as well. So if local action is where we have power and vital conservation decisions are made, the question is, how do we build the kind of community that can show up, stay engaged, and make those decisions count? One of the ways that we're doing this is something we're relaunching this fall. It's the Conservation Leadership Institute, which some of you are graduates of, have been familiar with, and it served a purpose in our community for many years. Along with partners, we're reworking the curriculum of that, and this is in response to what we've heard for years, that people care, they do, but they don't always know how to engage or where to start. And increasingly, they don't trust the systems that they're being asked to engage in. So CLI is designed to change that. It's a free 8-week program that brings community members into the inner workings of conservation and local decision-making, connecting them with leaders, giving them tools, and building the confidence to show up. And what we've seen from past cohorts is powerful. People don't just learn, they stay engaged. They step into leadership roles, they become a part of the network. Because participation doesn't just happen, it has to be built. For us, conservation is not just about winning issues, it's about building the civic infrastructure that makes those wins possible. We are pivoting and focusing as much as we can on solutions, not just opposition. We're currently working on a project that will shape the future of Highway 22, not into a 4 or 5 lane freeway, but into something our community and wildlife actually needs. This involves a web of consultants, but they are not the decision makers. So what is the path to success? The biggest answer is relationships. The path to success isn't speed, it's connection. We've built relationships across sectors, politics, and perspectives that don't usually align. It's slower, it's harder, and requires you to check your ego, but it will result in stronger outcomes, reduce polarization when it's time for public scrutiny, and gives broader legitimacy to the solution. Through this process, we've also built bridges, some of the stereotypes and misconceptions and the labels that perpetuate distance within a community. This is how we build resilient networks, by focusing on shared outcomes and building trust that lasts beyond a single issue. In a time of rising polarization and increased development pressure, our role is also changing. We're not just an advocacy organization trying to stop bad ideas. We must adapt and assess the highest impact from energy spent, the need to be proactive more than reactive. I'm going to jump ahead a couple of slides here because I'm running out of time. But when this works, there's a ripple through the community that results in more people showing up, decisions holding, and even when we disagree, we don't fracture. Ultimately, that's what keeps social landscapes intact. And I will just end on this. For all of you that are here today, I ask you, what piece of the puzzle are you? And this kind of goes to what Jonathan Schechter was referring to this morning as a mosaic. Are you an expert in your field, an influencer, an organizer, or just someone who really cares? Acknowledge and embrace the unique and vital role that you have in your local community, whether that's here or elsewhere, and realize that it is together that we make the bigger picture. I'll leave it at that.
Next, we have Kate Gersh, Associate Director of Jackson Hole Wildlife Foundation. She's presenting Bearwise Jackson Hole Elevates Conservation Through Collaboration.
Good afternoon. I'm here today representing Bearwise Jackson Hole, which for 20 years has been advancing its mission of keeping bears wild and people safe. Our partnership includes state and federal agencies, local government, and Jackson Hole Wildlife Foundation, which is its sole nonprofit partner. For 20 years, collectively, we've had a unified vision and towards wildlife stewardship and conflict mitigation through education and outreach, particularly focused on improving positive coexistence with human and bears in our community. When our partnership first started, we were focused on black bear conflict, knowing that we needed to prepare for the day where grizzly bears would expand their range into our county. That expansion has happened, and that is a win that we fully celebrate. But that does mean we have more bears in more places, overlapping with humans more often. We have bears that have existed on 97% of the county's public land that are now fully, very much also on 3% of our private lands, which has presented new challenges, and we've had to adapt and react accordingly. Our, definitely as a community and a partnership, our success should be measured by decreased conflicts, increased compliance, but there are also factors that we need to consider that do affect our results. Things like natural events. Did we have a good berry crop that year or a poor berry crop? Also, we are very aware there are socioeconomic barriers that exist in our community still that are preventing everyone from being truly bear wise. The town and county have recently done a lot to update wildlife feeding regulations and land development regulations. Just a few highlights at the county level. In 2022, I'm sure you all know, there was a major overhaul of wildlife feeding regulation. Bearwise Jackson Hole were key technical advisors to this process that instituted a countywide ordinance requiring bear-resistant trash cans, and also increased regulation around indirect feeding, such as bird feeders, livestock feed, and compost and apiaries. I should say today where we're at is more enforcement and really have a clear direction and message that if you have unsecured food attractants on your property, you are out of compliance. Thanks to the town, Tanya provided this graph. We have data on bear conflicts from 2008 to 2024. And note here about the big red line, Grand Teton National Park for sure has decades of data on bear conflicts. It's just since 2016, purely because of formatting, that we've been able to incorporate their data into the countywide data set. In 2024, you can see we had a huge spike of conflicts. Why? Well, probably a couple factors, but primarily it was a really bad year for the berry crop, and that led to increased conflicts. However, just last year, we had a really good turnaround and report only 35 conflicts in the region. Half of those were due to unsecured food and garbage, bears getting food rewards. Those, I've been told, are now resolved. Also, just a few weeks ago, the town was reporting happily that there's 77% compliance in the town, per wildlife feeding regulations. So we have made a lot of progress. In the past few years, Bearwise Jackson Hole has embarked on massive outreach to educate our community on the updated wildlife feeding regulations. There's a lot to say here. Essentially, we've tried to hit every household possible through digital and print material translated into Spanish, also radio, PSAs, a myriad of outreach events. We also distributed our Living in Bear Country guide to 2,400 households in the county in known bear conflict areas and tried to assess what inspires them and what knowledge allows them to be bear-wise. We had 37 responses, which is a very small sample size, but we're going to take it as a snapshot of community sentiment and where we are today. 38% of those respondents said that they had frustration with their neighborhood or neighbors remaining out of compliance. Also, the cost of products remains a barrier. So we're going to take these results, and Bearwise Jackson Hole is moving from broad education to really targeted attention and focusing on hot spots and going to where the conflicts are and hopefully getting ahead of them so there's none in the future. And this includes outreach to HOAs, apple harvest days, a myriad of possible solutions. And to close, this issue is big, and it's community. The community has to really rise to it and keep being proactive and progressing. There's a lot of people to thank, but basically together our voice is louder and our reach is more expansive. Thank you.
Next, we have Niah Pennington, Stewardship Coordinator with the Teton Regional Land Trust, protecting the call of the cranes.
Hi, my name is Niah, and today I'm going to talk about the Greater Yellowstone Sandhill Crane Initiative that the Teton Regional Land Trust has. This is a collaborative effort focused on conserving one of the most iconic and ancient species in our region. Sandhill cranes, to me, are more than just a migratory bird. They're a signal of seasonal change. They're a signal of seasonal change. Their presence represents healthy wetlands, and their perseverance is dependent on how we manage our land and conservation. Today, I'm going to walk through where these cranes live, the challenges that they face in Teton Valley, Idaho, and how the partnerships across landscapes are securing their future. I think everybody's had a picture of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and so we all know how important and essential it is to keep this ecosystem intact. In Teton Valley, Idaho, where much of this work is taking place, the landscapes are a mosaic of working agricultural farms, wetlands, rivers, and open space. These working lands are not necessarily separate from wildlife habitat. In fact, they include wildlife habitat, and they're essential to it. At Teton Regional Land Trust, our mission is to conserve working farms and ranches and fish and wildlife habitat and open space for now and into the future. And this initiative builds directly on our mission, and it recognizes that crane conservation depends on keeping these landscapes both economically viable and ecologically functional. Sandhill cranes we're focusing on belong to the Rocky Mountain population, which breed primarily in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, or Greater Yellowstone area. And as shown in this slide, the nesting areas are closely tied to their pre-migration staging. So the cranes will select their nesting dependent on if it'll allow them efficiently to travel to pre-migration staging areas where they can use the waste grain from the agricultural fields in Idaho before their migration. This means that conservation isn't just about protecting these isolated wetlands. It's about maintaining a connected landscape where nesting and feeding and staging habitats all function together. All right, some of the threats that sandhill cranes face and many other species in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem are habitat loss and land use changes, especially subdivision and development. These continue to reduce available space and impede in habitat security for cranes. Human disturbance can impact their nesting success and their roosting availability. Roosting security is also especially important as we experience more and more recreation on Teton River and our valuable wetlands. This increases stress in these roosting sites. And on top of that, climate change is altering the hydrology, which ultimately impacts everything. It impacts their roosting, their food availability in the spring with amphibians and fish and whatnot. So individually, it seems like these threats are manageable, but when they're all together, it becomes a really big problem. So in response to these challenges, this initiative was created, and it focuses on 4 key strategies. And the first is habitat conservation and restoration. So by working with landowners to protect wetlands, migratory corridors, and working lands through permanent conservation easements, and assisting them with wetland and habitat restoration projects. Second, we have a supplemental feeding program which helps to reduce agricultural conflict and also supports cranes during their critical migration periods. Third, we have a population monitoring program, and through these coordinated surveys and data sharing, we can track population trends and focus our management decisions. And fourth is public outreach and education, because we all know that long-term conservation depends on public support. And this work wouldn't be possible without all of our initiative partners. So we collaborate with agencies like US Fish, Wildlife, and Service and Idaho Fish and Game, who provide their technical expertise and long-term monitoring efforts as well. Organizations like Intermountain Aquatics help support restoration efforts on our conservation easement properties, and programs like the Idaho Master Naturalist provide citizen scientists that contribute valuable field data. Equally important, and I'd say probably most important, are landowners who voluntarily participate in conservation easements and voluntarily fund their habitat restoration projects on their properties. And these partnerships are the backbone to this initiative. And so I'll close with this, that the future of sandhill cranes, and I argue most species in, oops, did I go back? Well, that's okay. Anyway, the future of sandhill cranes in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem doesn't depend on one organization, one agency, but rather it depends on these resilient networks and these partnerships that we build today. And so when we can align our conservation goals, we can, with working lands and also community values, we can create solutions that are durable and meaningful. Thank you all for being part of this and for your commitment to conservation.
Next, we have Chuck Peterson, Professor Emeritus at Idaho State and a longtime NRCC RA. He's going to be talking about amphibian connectivity in the greater Yellowstone.
Well, I'd like to thank the NRCC for the opportunity to give this talk and for all of their support over 30 years now for amphibian conservation studies in the GYE. I'd also like to thank my co-author, Matt Lucia, for educating me about the importance of private lands and conservation easements. I had not appreciated how important conservation easements were. They protect more acreage than all of the national park system put together. Since the 1980s, amphibian declines were detected, and then there's been increased attention to amphibian conservation in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and we know far, far more now than we did in the early 90s. There have been numerous amphibian surveys and citizen science projects like iNaturalist that have refined and really extended our knowledge of the distribution of amphibians in the ecosystem. The broad-scale, long-term occupancy modeling program from the National Park Service, and Long-term mark recapture studies have helped us understand population trends for multiple species. Radiotelemetry studies have indicated the extensive movements and the complexity of the habitats that are used by amphibians. And landscape genetic studies have helped us quantify gene flow and connectivity and shown us the effects of different landscape characteristics on the movement patterns of amphibians. And I think that the awareness that's been generated by these studies of ungulate migrations and the importance of these migration corridors, that perspective needs to be expanded to other groups of organisms, including amphibians. It may be on a finer spatial scale, but over time it's going to be applicable to a broad spatial scale. What do GYE amphibians need? They need still water for breeding and for development. They need appropriate foraging habitat. They need suitable habitat for dispersal and migration, and also for overwintering sites. We basically have mostly terrestrial hibernators, but we also have some species that require permanent, unfrozen, oxygenated water in order to persist. A variety of factors influence connectivity. Topography, hydrology, land cover and land use, especially in wetlands and riparian areas. Fire history affects connectivity, and of course, roads. And these movements among these different areas are more extensive. Individuals may be moving up to multiple kilometers away to fulfill their requirements for overwintering or breeding, for example. Private lands are especially important for amphibians. Private lands make up approximately 6 million acres, 27% of the GYE, and they're especially important for amphibians because they make up much of the lower elevation wetland habitats. About a third of all the wetlands in the GYE occur on private lands. These habitats are especially threatened by development, and maintaining connectivity is going to require collaboration among private landowners, agencies, conservation organizations, and academics. And I think land trusts can play a particularly important role here, helping conserve and restore amphibian populations by connecting wetland habitats on private and public lands through conservation easements. Most of these studies I've mentioned have been conducted on public lands, but we need to know what's going on the private lands as well. And so we think that it's going to be important to extend studies like this to private lands, particularly landscape genetic studies, so we can learn the effects of various land cover types and uses on amphibian connectivity. We think that the Blackfoot River watershed and using northern leopard frogs, which are a species of greatest conservation need, would be an excellent location for this study. It has land trust properties on it, state wildlife management areas, National Forest Service land, and multiple private landowners. We would propose using non-destructive genetic sampling to develop a landscape permeability model. You can see what something like that might look like in that circuit flow model there in the lower right, and that information would allow land trusts with the information that they need to prioritize future conservation easements and restoration activities. Thank you.
Next we have Sonia Guimon. She's the founder of 3F Wild, I hope I said that right. And her title is Squeezing Through, Handbook for Big Game Movement Across the Built Environment.
People around the globe are looking for ways to build infrastructure so that it supports both our communities and our environment. In a coastal city, it may look like reconstructing a waterfront so that it protects the community from flooding, while also building a beautiful park with amazing views and restoring aquatic habitat. In a mountain town, it can look like redesigning streets to improve everyday commute, while also reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. What's common between this infrastructure solutions is that they're all trying to hit multiple goals at once. And in fact, major sustainability frameworks are guiding us towards integrating environmental, economy, and social goals into the design of every project. Wyoming, with its protected ecosystem and growing infrastructure, is a unique laboratory to be able to do just that. Today, we're going to look at just one example. Wyoming's segment of Interstate 80, originally built in the 60s and 80s, is a major piece of infrastructure. Has anybody driven on it before? It definitely provides a link between across this vast state. It serves people and it serves the economy. However, one other thing that it does, it effectively blocks the north-south migration of many animal species like mule deer, pronghorn, and elk, among others, which is vital to their survival. So to come up with a solution that's as multifaceted as the ones that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, we need to look at all the systems that are involved. So for this particular case, we need to understand, we need to learn from the wildlife and people who study it. 2, we need to learn from infrastructure and people who manage it. And 3, we need to be able to combine those insights in spatial design solutions as well as a path to implementation. So let's start with the wildlife. So it turns out if you look a little closer at the wildlife along the interstate, and that's exactly what the wildlife biologists at the Wyoming Fish and Game Department have been doing, some animals do successfully cross the interstate. This mule deer, for example, made it to the other side using this existing underpass structure and was able to successfully complete its seasonal migration. And in fact, at this specific location, at mile marker 16 along Interstate 80, there were over 1,000 mule deer documented doing just that in 1 year. And that's also true for other structures like culverts, river bridges, and even highway interchanges. In fact, there's over 170 structures along this stretch of the highway that either already have wildlife use or could have it in the future. So now let's look more closely at the infrastructure. And that's what this project, the Handbook for Wildlife Movement Across the Built Environment, is doing. So we already know that these types of bridges that were originally built to move machinery and cattle across the highway were discovered by the animals, even though no one has guided them there. However, what we also learned from monitoring is that not all structures were created equal, and something as simple as stormwater runoff coming off the interstate and down under the bridge can significantly limit the wildlife's ability to cross, because apparently wildlife doesn't love walking on ice, and so if runoff freezes, that basically renders that structure impassable. In other cases, fencing can obstruct wildlife movement, or even river bridges that are usually such a great place for wildlife to move can become practically impassable during spring flooding, which is what happened here, where in the fall, lots of pronghorn were documented using the site, and then in the spring, only a few, including this brave individual, were able to cross. So how do we move from insights like this to design solutions and a path to implementation? Well, from our partners at Wyoming Department of Transportation, we also know that a lot of the structures, in fact, have been built in the 1960s and 70s and actually are reaching the end of their useful life. So here, immediately, we have a synergy. If these structures have to be replaced anyway, why not replace them with structures that can protect or even improve wildlife connectivity? For example, could this new bridge be designed with better drainage that reduces the amount of ice forming runoff? Could the existing cattle fencing be reconfigured in a way that continues to serve the ranchers, but also funnels the wildlife towards the crossings? Could the engineered riverbanks be reimagined as softer edges that provide enough space for the wildlife to move while also improving river health? Solutions like this come from a nuanced understanding of the ecosystem, a nuanced understanding of the infrastructure, and an ability to combine those in spatial design solutions as well as a path to implementation. This is only possible through collaboration. This model can be applied to other contexts as well. For example, to other types of infrastructure, such as residential development or energy, other types of wildlife, such as fish, pollinators, birds, other mammals, as well as other geographies, empowering developers, designers, public agencies, utilities to continue to build or retrofit infrastructure that allows to play, connect, work, but also restores our natural and ecological systems. Thank you.
Next, we have Kaycee Prevedel. She's the Partnership Director for the Wind River Tribal Buffalo Initiative, and her title is Can Indigenous Management Reshape Federal Policies?
Good afternoon. My name is Kaycee Prevedel, and as mentioned, I'm with the Wind River Tribal Buffalo Initiative. Before I moved to the Wind River Reservation and began working for a Native nonprofit, I also work for the NPS, the Forest Service, and the BLM. So I come to you today with the question, can Indigenous management reshape federal policies? In my presentation, we will look at past failures, the importance of Native sacred landscapes, and a vision for large-scale ecological restoration led by Native nations. Beautiful picture of buffalo for you. All right, so to understand why change is needed, we can look at Mount Tenabo in Nevada. Tenabo is the origin mountain of the Tamoac Western Shoshone tribe. Despite its cultural significance, a Canadian gold mining company was permitted by the BLM to conduct mining operations on this land. It turned Mount Tenabo into a 600-acre open mining pit and barred access to the Tamoac band of Western Shoshone peoples who had lived there for over 13,000 years. This example epitomizes a fundamental lack of understanding of Indigenous land rights and sacred sites. It highlights a systemic lack of government protection and meaningful consultation with tribal nations. After working for a few federal agencies in the archaeological departments, I've learned firsthand that consultation is not enough. Co-governance of this site could have prevented this tragedy. Another example of an important landscape is Bears Ears. It is considered the #1 most sensitive archaeological area in the United States. It contains over 100,000 archaeological sites, including 5,000 ancient examples of ancient architecture, which they're just so cool. While currently managed by the BLM and the Forest Service, it's the ancestral land of many southwestern tribes. Crucially, the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition, composed of 5 tribes, petitioned the Obama administration for protection of this region. Their efforts turned Bears Ears into a successful model for other co-management agreements between tribes and federal agencies, proving that when tribes lead the petition for protection, it creates a template for collaborative stewardship that respects both cultural and animal relatives. One quote that I wrote down later from the Bears Ears Intertribal Coalition was, quote, "We possess solid land management capabilities." And they had to say this in 2016. All right, so why is federal policy so central? Due to the nature of colonization in the US, some public lands are some of the only places where these landscapes still exist. More now than ever, the federal government needs an avenue for Indigenous peoples to have the option to govern regarding lands and wildlife management. As Paul Hawken An American environmentalist said in a speech regarding climate change proactive solutions, "There is a choice to be made to promote economic policies that despoil indigenous lands or to support cultures and the remaining biological sanctuaries. What is at stake if we do not listen to indigenous communities? Perhaps the very ecological balance of our planet and ancient observational knowledge on how to deal with climate change." I'll just also mention that it's ingrained in all native languages. All right, so working at the Wind River Tribal Buffalo Initiative has just been a transformative experience. So WRTBI's mission is land rematriation through buffalo restoration, culturally relevant research, and connecting the youth with buffalo. Buffalo were missing for around 130 years from the Wind River Reservation, and they were returned in 2016. Now the nonprofit I work for helps 2 tribes, the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone, manage buffalo herds. And this is just a great example of indigenous management that's working well. By prioritizing tribal sovereignty, we are successfully restoring the balance between people, the buffalo, and the land. So just wanted to plug that supporting Native-led organizations like WRTBI is an actionable step that anyone can take. All right, the future. Oh, perfect. 1 minute. All right, looking forward. I just want to mention that the Wind River Indian Reservation, I chose a map without it, but it's that little cutout, that was dumb. It's that little cutout on the bottom right side. It's part of the GYE. The Wind River Indian Reservation is adjacent to the Bridger Teton National Forest. I have been in some really initial conversations to try to get buffalo that are wildlife on the Wind River Reservation sovereign access into these public lands. Looking forward, we should apply successful models such as Bears Ears and the Wind River Tribal Buffalo management strategies into the whole greater Yellowstone ecosystem. As many as 50,000 or more buffalo can be supported on this landscape, and we want to see tribal management across all jurisdictions. With Indigenous leadership and together with the buffalo, we can all benefit from ecological balance, community ties, collaboration, and respect for the land. Thank you.
Next, we have Jay Dallas Gudgell, Vice President of the Buffalo Field Campaign. His title is "Can Indigenous Land and Species Management Save Us?"
I used to be young. Mpetawashte, Amachape, Dallas Gudgell. Good day to you all. My name is Dallas Gudgell. Father, son, cousin, friend, grandfather. Yankton, Dakota, assistant Wapanan bands and clans. Grew up on the Fort Peck Reservation in northeastern Montana. And we have buffalo on my reservation now. I did not grow up with buffalo. So how exciting, right? Can tribal land use management and species management save us? So that question was asked this morning. I don't know. I'm willing to try and find out. I'm going to run this thing too, all right. I'm also a tribal programs director for Buffalo Field Campaign, and we have a partnership. Well, we've been out in the field with buffalo for 28 years. We have a 28-year-old wildlife database. Mostly is tracking buffalo, but all wildlife. And we have recently partnered with Rutgers and Yale. We're going to be doing ArcGIS. And this was a Yale project, and this is a snapshot of a 6-minute, what do they call it, story map. If you're not familiar with a story map and doing ArcGIS, it's kind of a big deal. So this 6-minute story map, and it uses some of our pinpoint data for buffalo migrations in and around Yellowstone Park. Buffalo Field Campaign is organized in this way. We do science, policy, and storytelling. We have a place to gather where we do storytelling, create relationship with buffalo, with one another, with the land, with the greater Yellowstone. We're out, like I say, out in the field witnessing for the buffalo. What we're attempting to do is we're going to be working with Rutgers and a graduate student to do some ArcGIS mapping of a continental buffalo recovery map, essentially, mapping potential habitat, potential migratory corridors, potential hotspots that we can expand on, Greater Yellowstone being the best hotspot for buffalo, although there are a few others. There's about allegedly 5,000, depending on who you talk to, in northeastern Utah on the Fort Duchesne Reservation. They're essentially wild as well. The wild bison in Yellowstone, the longest continuously wild herd that we're aware of, arguably Antelope Island maybe, but there's maybe a few others. So the mapping and other data will inform a continental bison recovery plan. This has been being led by Indigenous-led organizations like Indigenous-led Wind River Tribal Buffalo Project, ITBC, Intertribal Buffalo Council, and Buffalo Field Campaign. Thank you. That was slide one. All right. I abandoned my original talk, so I'll see what I can do. Mapping is going to inform a continental bison recovery plan that tribes will write. They will manage these buffalo on all federal lands in this country. Now we're doing it continental, so we're working with Mexico. Chihuahua's got some herds that they're bringing back. We're working with Canada. So we're going to do this. And what we're doing is we did policy. Well, there was a bill that was introduced, and I got a chance to bring these 10 individuals to DC for Senate Bill 5115, which is the Tribal Heritage, American Bison, Grizzly Bear, and Wolf Restoration and Coexistence Act. Because it's Congress, it has to be long. We could just call it the Sacred Species Act, which is what I would prefer. We also, so a few of us got together after this. This was introduced in September of 2024. Elections happened after that. It's still sitting in the committee drawer. We'll see what happens with that. So we went on to, a few of us that are in this picture went on to write a treaty. The treaty is going to be a complement to the 12-year-old Continental Bison Treaty that was originally written with mostly just tribes in kind of British Columbia and the US. The Bloods, Blackfeet, and that was some participation with my reservation at Fort Peck. The treaty authorizes tribal sovereignty, tribal sovereign supremacy to manage buffalo on all federal lands in this country. So the Yellowstone herd is confined on their reservation like my ancestors were. They can't come off without being persecuted, especially if they go north into Montana. So most of the park is in Wyoming. So what we're wanting to do is have this mapping inform a recovery plan written and managed by tribes under the authority of this treaty. So the next step is we'd go to the United Nations Rights of Indigenous People, that proclamation, and essentially try to make the federal government and the states irrelevant in buffalo management and get the buffalo out of the park under tribal management. We co-evolved with them, and we believe, as our relative, we would be a good steward of that relative. I haven't seen the 1 minute yet. That's on my reservation. She's about to hold it up. On my reservation, that is a herd. We all have our stories. See if I can wrap it up in 1 minute. I could tell us lots of stories about that very place that I used to ride with Art when we were running cows on that place. So in the 474 treaties that were signed, we Native people never did cede buffalo's right to roam. So this new treaty is hopefully going to give buffalo their sovereign authority and a sovereign access to access their old habitat. So what's the biggest problem? Habitat. So we're going to look for habitat, and that's why we're doing the mapping, that's why we're doing the corridors. And that corridor, they'll do what they used to do. They'll run from Mexico, Texas, and they won't stop running until they get to Kansas or Saskatchewan or British Columbia. So that's what we're looking to do. Is there import? It's all about relationship. This is when I would tell you the buffalo story, where that ended in Ken Burns' documentary. Rosalie Little Thunder and Arval Looking Horse prayed while the buffalo were being slaughtered by the park 28 years ago. And Rosalie was arrested and decided that she was going to start Buffalo Field Campaign to protect the bison. I got the end sign. We are storytellers. The white buffalo calf was born to the wild herd on June 4th of 2024, culminating in the prophecy, the end of one of our prophecies for the return of buffalo and the return of my people. So I'm going to leave it there. Support Native-led organizations, and thank you. That's why we're doing this.
Next, we have Trevor Bloom. He's a botanist for the Forest Service, PhD candidate, and NRCC RA. He's presenting building networks personally and professionally to amplify conservation.
Great, thanks everyone. So growing up here in Jackson, I've sat in the audience there and I've stood on this stage many times, wearing many hats, including being a community member at a band, to being a cameraman on stage, to being a land manager, a scientist, and a guide. But today I was actually asked to stand up here and discuss my personal journey and affinity to build relationships towards a common goal of conservation. So against better judgment, I'm not wearing a hat today, so excuse my hair. So it goes without saying that I couldn't be here without tremendous support from many of the people here, my community, and especially NRCC. So I just want to highlight a few examples because conservation, it doesn't happen in isolation, and now with a world of misinformation, communicating science and communicating research is probably as important or maybe more important than boots on the ground and doing that work. So I have a few examples. So one example here is working with citizen science and doing outreach and education to the younger generations. So one example of that is a program we started with the Nature Conservancy called Wildflower Watch, where we are teaching people from all over to identify plants and engage with plants and engage with the concept of climate change. So in general, we found that plants are flowering anywhere from 17 days, or in this case, this year, 38 days earlier than they were in the 1970s, based on data that was collected by Frank and John Craighead. Doing outreach and education to high school. Next week I'm going to go stand in the high school that I went to and talk to the younger generation about conservation and getting outside. And then also working with college students. I think it's really important to engage again with that younger generation. Another way that I've found to build a network that goes way beyond the echo chambers of Jackson Hole, for example, is to make films. So I've been making films for 15 years now, and most recently I got the opportunity to work on the Grizzly 399 film that made it onto PBS Nature, which was an awesome honor, and it also allowed me to make relationships. Like, for example, through this process, I got to meet Jane Goodall before she passed away. The other really powerful way to build relationships that I've found is like working with the public. So I founded Guides of Jackson Hole, that's now run by Liam, and I'm still working for this great organization, and I still just love, getting outside with people from all over the world, guiding them to Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Park, seeing that look on people's faces the first time that they see Yellowstone Falls or the first time they see a grizzly bear. I think it's really humbling to continue to see these places through the eyes of people that it's their first time that they've been there. And I think it's really, really powerful. I've met people from every political view in many countries, but getting out and seeing these places, you have that opportunity to talk about why grizzly bears are important or wolves are important or federal lands are important. And it's actually pretty amazing how few people can know the difference between, the U.S. Forest Service and the BLM and national parks and private land. They say, I know how to solve your housing problem. Why don't we just put houses here on the National Elk Refuge, right? And so it's really humbling to see and meet those people. And one of the things I love the most is actually training new guides to do this. I also think that one thing that I've been really fortunate to do is get to travel internationally. Recently, I got to help teach a class on international conservation in Borneo with students from University of Wyoming. And to go to new locations and actually the whole premise of the class was to draw parallels between some of the issues we're seeing here in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and what they're seeing in Borneo, which is this amazing landscape where there's endemic species that live nowhere else, but it's 75% deforested and turned into palm oil. On the other hand, that's the only job the local people can get. And who are we to say, or one of the only jobs to say that they need to conserve that important landscape? And so I'd say some lessons from that is one of the best things to do to build relationships is get out in the field with people, spend that time with them. Another is, do some hands-on things like planting a tree. The best time to plant a tree, people say, was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. And then the big one I wanted to take home is that building relationships is just like building friendships. Many of the people here in this room are my personal friends and have carried me. This is at my wedding. You can see I'm getting held up. And a lot of people in this room were actually at my wedding, and a lot of the people that I work with are actually my friends. And so it's amazing what you can get done when the people that you work with are also your friends. And the last thing I wanted to leave with is that, this is a reminder, and everybody in this room knows this, but the community is made up of much more than just us people. Thank you.
Our last talk is Sarah Carrico. She's with Harvard University, Gossamer Labs, IUCN Spider and Scorpion Specialist Group. She's going to talk about Operation Spider.
Hello, I am delighted to be here with you. I am going to talk about interweaving insights inspired by invertebrates to better care for our interdependence. And I'm speaking on my own behalf and wanted to acknowledge the lands where I do my research in the lab are the traditional lands of the Massachusetts, and I'm supported by the Stony Brook watershed. And here, when I'm doing field work here, it's over 27 tribes supported by the Upper Snake River Headwater Basin. These are the tribes that have historical and long-standing and continuing relationships. And the question that drives my work is how can we better care for our interdependence, thinking about ecological and societal systems together. And I'm going to present a unique and often underrepresented example of interdependence from the invertebrate world. When we come here, and I'm going to focus on the beauty and wonder of spiders as an entry point. So they've evolved to survive in nearly every habitat on Earth, surviving extinction events. They've evolved over 400 million years, and they're vital to critical foundations of life as both predator and prey. Just thinking about the array of talks we've had today, invertebrates were sort of supporting features in like the whitebark, the plight of the whitebark with the pine beetles, the songbirds that we heard about with Andy and possibly their decline in their food source, angling, the caddisflies. So they're here, but often not the focus of our attention directly. So what can our young species learn from them? We've talked about dots and mosaics, and I want to offer, I think spiders offer us, or remind me of the metaphor of the web, a way to think about how our actions ripple out to even seemingly distant parts. Spiders have inspired humankind for millennia, from Africa to the Americas. Here's the Anansi. Just a matter of time, I'm going to flip through that. But when we get to the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem here in the Tetons, we're often invited to think about and learn about the charismatic megafauna and not the over 90, 95%, 97%, if we talk about E.O. Wilson, animals who are here. A study from last year analyzed over 14,500 projects, and they found that of the $2 billion in conservation funds, almost 83% was directed towards vertebrates, and only 6.6% went to invertebrates. So how can we address the biodiversity knowledge gap and include invertebrates, since they are critical to the foundations of all of our lives? One way I've been doing that is exploring unexpected connections. And for the centennial of the National Park Service and in honor of my spider mentors, I gathered artists, scientists, and pastry chefs together to create an exhibition that invited us and sort of challenged us to think about how they've innovated things and how they might influence us in the future. Here is a heroic scaled chocolate spider created by Chef Ortega of Cocoa Love. And spiders and chocolate, what is the connection? Anyone? So cacao has a very intricate flower. And the ones who typically pollinate them are these 1 to 3 millimeter tiny flies, midges. And in 1973 in Ghana, one of the world's largest producers of cacao, they saw that the midges were actually using spider sheet webs as pollinating platforms. And another project I'm currently focused on is how can we interweave insights from spider silk to support P53 proteins, to support the body's cancer suppression networks to help shut cancer down. So all spiders spin silk, but not all make webs. And the qualities of silk are ones that I think we can think about as we gather to talk about resilient networks, incredibly strong and very flexible. And this is an artwork from that exhibition by D.G. House. I'm gonna talk a little bit about a spider who lives here in the valley, Castanera. This spider uses her silk to find a nook in a rock to spin a shimmery egg sac, and then she spends dawn to dusk hauling hundreds of objects with specialized tools on her body to create these intricate artful mounds that can include snail shells, cricket legs, purple blossoms, and often seeds. They use these in part, and mating behavior, love on the rocks, Operation Spider. So a big bridge was going to be built. Looks like it was going to impact almost 38% of the egg socks. Was invited to write a public comment. And what ensued was a volunteer crew ended up, we were wondering what can you do to sort of help at least allow these animals to complete their life cycle. And so they gathered together with pickup trucks and Pulowskis and created rock nurseries. They considered microhabitats, interactions with other organisms like seeds and then wasps who use their egg sacs as incubators, and then the power of sharing these stories across boundaries, geographic disciplines, and ecological things. And this story was selected as an international success story and has been invited to go to the World Biodiversity Forum in Davos. So I think one of the things in conclusion, the most powerful thing that I think we can do is shift our lens to focus on our interdependence. And though we may not have silk, we have the power of our human creativity and our capacity to care. And we can harness this power to increase the beneficial role that we can play and have ripple out throughout the web of life. Our fates are intertwined. And I want to thank you all for your attention. Thank NRCC for convening us in this beautiful day, inspirational day, and as well as to the many people who have made it possible for me to be here today. Thank you.
All right, I'd like to invite all of our Quick Talk speakers back up here to sit at our table, and we can start our Q&A session. I think folks will begin to grab the cube and have it available for you. So once those get rolling, we'll start having them answer some questions. So start thinking of some. We've got a lot of local leaders here and a lot of folks working with underrepresented species, for sure. So a lot of great fuel here for a good discussion. Does anyone feel like they want to open it up? Yeah. Peyton's going to run the cube to you.
This is a little deja vu, Bernie.
I really want to throw this thing. Trevor, you touched upon something that I think came up in the earlier session, which is kind of bridging the generation gap between me, you, and now you and the students that you're talking to. And I think that you touched upon something that I've always felt when I was, younger and trying to find my way through both politics and then the environment, is I think there's a problem with each succeeding older generation that they think of themselves as teachers or mentors or elders or in some way more experienced, which they are, but that somehow sets them apart from a younger generation. What I've found, and there's maybe a half a dozen people in this room that I can point to and say, when I'm talking to somebody who's in the same business that I'm in, which is conservation, and they're younger, I want to be their friend. That's a much stronger network than just being an advisor or just being a mentor or an elder. And then maintain that relationship. And, hi, Kate. And, and I think that's something that we really miss, is that aspect of it, which, can be, it requires more commitment, more engagement, and maybe you find out more than you want to know. But both ways. But to me, that is the real way to make a connection that lasts. And I applaud you for bringing that up. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Bernie. And I'll just say, the one thing that friendship does is it transcends all the hats that we wear, the roles that we might be in, and I just think that it's really important because all of us, right? We might have a university affiliation or a government affiliation or a nonprofit affiliation, but at the end of the day, we're all people, and we all just are thinking about conserving and working towards biodiversity, and we can do that as friends, even if we can't do that within our specific role. So.
Bernie, I'll add you are a great friend.
You are.
Hi. I'm addressing this to the gentleman from Fort Peck. My question to you is, what can we do as conservationists to help you have the buffalo change from livestock to wild animals?
That's a good question. I'll say one thing before I say that. The picture where we're all laughing with Senator Booker, one of the fellows from Wind River, Northern Arapaho, and it talks about what this gentleman and what you're talking about. He said, everybody say commodity cheese before we took that picture. You might not all get that, but if you're on a reservation, you do. One of his sayings, one of the things he says, is we need to learn how to be good relatives. Now, I use that rather than be good friends, but that'll work too, if you all go there. And it's good relatives to our four-legged relatives and our non-human relatives. What can we do to support tribal initiatives? Is that what you were saying? Livestock to wildlife. Okay, gotcha. They just passed the wildlife or bison as wildlife in Colorado. That's what we need to be doing. We need to be doing that more. Wind River Reservation has also done that on both sides. The Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone, both tribal councils have passed it, and then it was approved for reservation-wide. The more states that we can get to consider buffalo wildlife, that would be great. I worked with some representatives and senators, congressional people in Colorado also to do a one-sentence amendment to the National Bison Heritage Act, which creates first Saturday of every November as National Bison Day. It is our national mammal. One sentence to that act that says bison will be considered wildlife would then have some of these states like Montana who treat them as livestock. Actually in Montana they're defined as a species in need of disease control. So that is, I think, one of the biggest things we can do. And if we're talking about tribal management and we have adjacent BLM, federal land, Forest Service, our buffalo on our tribal reservations are under tribal management. If they happen to wander off into public land, I do believe we have the sovereign treaty authority to manage them, and they should be managed as wildlife. So that's the short answer. Just keep supporting your state legislature. I talked to Wyoming Fish and Game recently about their status. I'd love to see it be wildlife in Wyoming.
Thank you, Dallas. I think there's one question down there and then one in the little row off to the side.
Hi, this is for Kaycee. I drove past your property yesterday, and as I was driving through, I noticed there was a lot of private ranch land, or it looked like private ranch land, and I'm not sure who owns it. I suspect there's a historical injustice somewhere in there. But I'm just wondering, how are you negotiating with your neighbors, or working with, or what issues do you have with them?
Thank you. That's a great question. So the Wind River Tribal Buffalo Initiative headquarters is just north of the Wind River. And it was 300 acres of Eastern Shoshone land is where it started. So part of our initiative is buying back those lands north of the river. And you're right, it was a historical injustice. Those areas used to be the heart of the Wind River Reservation. I wish I had a map. Stop in anytime. All of y'all can come in anytime to the headquarters. There's maps on the wall. But where our headquarters is smack dab in the middle of the reservation. In 1905, there was a specific homesteading act similar to the Dawes Act that specific to the Wind River Reservation that sold off tribal lands and tried to force assimilation upon buffalo people. People have always been around buffalo, so they tried to put them on reservations, tried to make them into agriculturalists, and many of those areas, there are native and non-native ranchers, cattle ranchers, and alfalfa farmers in the area. So a big part of the, there are some tensions, but making connections, having relations with the neighbors is a big part. We have some of our biggest supporters are adjacent to Buffalo Camp or our headquarters. We also have some contentious relationships, and so we're working to raise a lot of money and buy back some of those lands in order to create a buffalo, more buffalo habitat and migratory corridor for them that connects right to some areas in the Wind River Reservation that are designated for buffalo. So the reservation is 2.2 million acres, so amazing potential for wildlife habitat. Hopefully that answered it.
I think there was one in the little balcony over there.
Thank you. First of all, thank you all so much. This was amazing. But I have a question for Jenny about your really amazing Sound and Conservation Leadership Institute. So I'm wondering who you're targeting to get involved, how you're doing that, and whether this is something that you're working with other communities to share that.
Yes,
program.
thanks. Thank you for the question. I had some of that originally planned to talk about, so thanks for the opportunity. CLI, as it's known in the community, is something that was around for many years. We are revamping it with some partners, Camino Camingo, Voices JH, and the Snake River Fund. And through that process, we're reworking the curriculum to really make sure that it fits today, the needs of our community today. And we're also happy to be able to offer it this year. We'll start applications this summer, and the first cohort with the revamped curriculum will go through this fall. But thanks to a grant from the Community Foundation, we're also able to offer that with Spanish translation for our Spanish-speaking community, and also to provide childcare for those in our community who want to be able to engage, and that's often a barrier. So as trying to eliminate as many barriers to participation in civic engagement as possible was really a goal going into revamping the program. It is open to everyone, any age, any demographic, and we encourage anyone to apply. I think a lot of the people in this room are people who already have some of this knowledge, but I would really encourage you. I think one of the ways we can continue to build the network as conservationists in this room is, choose a person who's expressed interest in what you do and help them build the tool set. If, you might not necessarily be able to show up all the time, but your friends, your neighbors, anyone in this community who's expressed, frustration around what they see and what's happening, this is a way to engage them and give them the tool set so that we can turn some of the frustrations that we're all experiencing into hope and action and engagement in our local community.
Hi. My question is for Sarah. First, I love that you focus on the charismatic minifauna and really highlighted species that are often overlooked or sometimes loathed, and put them in the spotlight, and also shared an incredible success story. I'm curious if you have smaller success stories or tips for the person who doesn't think about spiders on a daily basis, in what people can be doing who aren't doing construction projects, or something like that, to protect those very important invertebrates.
Thank you. So one thing that I have found in exploring spiders with people over a long time is there are a lot of people who do not like them at all. And so I try to meet that with a lot of curiosity and inclusion. So trying to figure out what is it about them, how they move, how they look, and then invite them to be part of, I do like spider superhero programs, or a Create, Reflect, Connect program, a Wisdom of Web's Global Leadership Initiative. So I think something that people can do is to decrease the squishing factor on spiders who are, really, key predators in the largest group, is meet them with education, curiosity, and I'm not sure what sector you're coming from, but if you don't have a major, like a multi-million-dollar bridge construction project, but you have people, all of us end up with spiders in our homes, finding out, educating yourselves on like what species are really good to have living with you, meeting their fears with curiosity, doing what you can to address the biodiversity knowledge gap, especially for the microfauna here. I don't know, have I helped you? And I just want to say, I wanted to, in my thank yous, I also wanted to thank my husband, who has been critical to a lot of the field work I've done and has taught me some of the deepest lessons on interdependence that I know.
Thank you, Sarah. I think we've got one down here, Peyton, or one up there.
I got another question for Dallas. The cattle ranching industry seems like a massive barrier for letting buffalo move north out of the park, and curious about plans and tactics for meeting that challenge and working with them.
One of the barriers for buffalo recovery is habitat and access to that habitat and access to historic habitat. It's a migratory species. They do have to migrate. I believe that, and wouldn't it be great if they were to migrate south and connect with the Teton herd? We need that genetic diversity. They're becoming genetically isolated in the park. So I was just in Gardner a few weeks ago, and one of the biggest things I think we could do is look. I had talked with some folks in Tom Minor Basin. It would be great. There is some language in the Custer-Gallatin Forest Plan that does talk about buffalo habitat, and so wouldn't it be great if there were a potential conservation herd that could be started in Tom Minor Basin? Land ownership is one of the problems, which is why we're mapping it. There happens to be the Church Universal United who doesn't really want buffalo on their they've got many acres that is preventing buffalo from crossing from Beatty Gulch over into Yankee Gem and up into Tom Minor Basin. So raising money, getting easements, maybe we can persuade the owners of the church to get an easement. Under tribal management, I would like to believe that the tribal, us exercising our treaty rights to hunt would not happen in March. We historically never did that. Why would we? The mamas are pregnant. When do we hunt? We hunt when the bulls are dumb in September during the rut. That's what we would do again. And so working with ranchers in that area and local communities, and the way we got safe harbor on Horse Butte was working with the locals. They want buffalo in their front yard. So we happened to have a governor many years ago who signed safe harbor for calving in March, April, May on Horse Butte. So we just need to do the same thing. Get some community dinners going, talk to one another, work with ranchers north of the park, get rid of the Beatty Gulch firing line, but yet support tribal sovereignty and tribal and our treaty hunting purposes for our usual and accustomed hunting and gathering. There's 49 tribes that have ancestral ties to the greater Yellowstone. There's a dozen treaties that are involved. It's a complicated process. If we just buy the habitat and ask and follow the buffalo, what are your tolerance zones? Buy them and allow them to be there, working with ranchers, hopefully.
I'll add something to that question too. So we've been talking a lot about it. So on the Wind River Reservation, there's 52 grazing units. Right now, 3 of them are designated for buffalo. So with the grazing units, we have buffalo fences separating them from cattle at the moment, but we're working to create a migratory pattern. So we're switching with some native cattle ranchers, switching the grazing units right now to create that migratory route. And also just looking at the land use and looking at land use change, monitoring the land and seeing which one needs a break. Some of the buffalo ranges right now were vacant for 7 or 8 years before they were converted from cattle to buffalo. So also land use change is a good response to that question.
Thank you. I think we'll take one more from here in the front.
Oh, I'm sad this will be the last one because it was a comment actually for Sarah. I invite you to stop by poster number 5. It's not about invertebrates, it's about spreading drilling waste on land. But I brought some aquatic bug books with me, and I would love for you to get one.
Thank you. I would love that. And I thought of a COVID-era spider success story that involves the University of Wyoming and Harvard. And it was that so thank you for that, and I'm ping-ponging back to you. So it was the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, and I was invited to go out by the Ruckelshaus Institute to go and do a project with them, and then COVID happened. And so I either had to figure out how to pivot or lose the funding. And so we decided to try and experiment and bring University of Wyoming students and Harvard University students together in this, we called it Create, Reflect, Connect, where we were looking for inspiration from these spiders. We were reflecting on our own lives, and at that point, being in isolation during the pandemic, and then creating. And we were borrowing from Castanera, the spider that I showed you, and how she looks around and she gathers what's near her. And so we started this practice of mound making. And half of the students at the end of it asked if I would continue on with them. And so for a year and a half, I met with the students on Zoom, and they would create mounds. We had a series of questions like, what did you gather? What are you creating for future generations? What are you gathering? Just a series of questions. We would meet online. They would share their mounds. They would talk about their lives. Sometimes the mounds included, the things that they had to do at the University of Wyoming for COVID testing if they were going on campus. And there was a student in there who signed up for the class specifically because she had arachnophobia. And at the end of this year and a half together, she ended up, she was in an honors class that was about ancient civilizations. And for her final honors project, she created a book of her mounds, her spider mounds. And she taught everybody about spiders. Then she talked about ancient civilization through these experiences of mound making, and she's now a PhD student. So that might be a spider success story.
I'm going to actually ask one final question. So this is to Kate, to Niah, Chuck, Sonia, and Trevor, who we'd love to hear from each of you. I'm going to ask the same question I asked the panelists last time. So to what do we owe the future, and why does it matter to you?
I'll start. When I think of Bearwise Jackson Hole, I think of the commitment and the long-term commitment we have to each other and to helping this community become more positively coexisting with bears. So the staying power, just thinking about our partnership, 20 years, there's been for sure turnover on staff, but we always have at least 1, 2, sometimes 3 representatives of each organization, and we keep going. So I think that staying power is really important with all of these initiatives, and as a community, we just need to keep going.
That's okay. There's plenty to choose from. What do we owe the future? I think we owe the future using all of these information that we know now that we didn't know before for responsible human development, coexistence with our wildlife, getting people to really appreciate where we live and how it connects to each individual one of us, and changing the tune. We should appreciate these things intrinsically, not because they give us something, but because they are. And it's important to me because I've never been in a place where I'm not farther than 5 miles from a dirt road, and I really want that to continue, and I want that to be available for the future.
I think that different organisms speak to different people, and if you protect the things that you care about, because things are so greatly interrelated, you will end up protecting a much wider range of things. So that, I think that the passion that you have for certain things, that will extend out. And if you could really work on the things that you care about, that will be really beneficial.
You know, I'm a landscape architect and a sustainability professional, and my early career was driven by a climate crisis, Superstorm Sandy, that happened on the East Coast and affected New York City, which is where I started my career in landscape architecture. And, you know, I don't know what else would I be doing if the climate crisis wasn't here. So I owe my whole career to the environmental degradation. In some ways, that's kind of crazy. In others, you know, my network of peers, who a lot of them are working towards, you know, achieving sustainability in their fields, whether that's lighting design, construction of airports, you know, or wildlife conservation, they're all driven by that mission, sustainability, creating a better future. And that gives us all, you know, purpose and meaning, and also a professional connection amongst different disciplines. So I think for me, that's the future. That's, you know, that's the crisis that we have to deal with. That's what can give us all purpose. That's how we can be all connected. And so as long as we can continue to build those network, and I could not agree more about building friendships and not just professional connections. Most of my, you know, discoveries professionally happened over an informal, you know, walk or coffee, not necessarily in a conference setting, although that's a great way to meet new people who might become friends in the future. So I think continuing, you know, just being human in our jobs and finding and making choices to, you know, with combining your professional passion with what actually needs to be done today, rather than conforming to the limits of the profession, like landscape architecture, for example, and continuing the status quo.
Yeah, and then I would just like to add, you know, Susan started with it, right? We're in the age of anxiety, and it's a really hard time to be a young person right now. There's a lot of stressors out there, so I think it's really important to leave the next generation with hope, and give them opportunities. So go out of your way to provide opportunities for that next generation, and to be hopeful.
Thank you all. That was lovely. It's really wonderful to see the interdependence of all of your work up there. I mean, Chuck's amphibians eat your spiders.